The sound echoed across Stage 7 at MGM Studios like a gunshot. Grace Kelly froze in her dressing room doorway. She had been heading to makeup when she heard it. The unmistakable crack of flesh against flesh, followed by a child's muffled sob. Director Vincent Sherman stood over 8-year-old Tommy Martinez, his hand still raised, his face twisted with rage. "You ruined the take again, you little brat. Do you have any idea how much money you just cost this studio?" Tommy pressed his small hand to his reddening cheek, tears streaming down his face. The entire crew stood in stunned silence, nobody daring to move. Nobody except Grace Kelly. What happened in the next 60 seconds would end Vincent Sherman's 20-year career and send shockwaves through Hollywood's power structure. But more importantly, it would reveal the fierce protector that lived beneath Grace Kelly's perfect exterior. The woman who would become a princess was about to show everyone what real royalty looked like. Grace stepped onto the soundstage. Her heels clicked against the polished floor with military precision. Every eye turned toward her, but she only had eyes for the trembling child. "Tommy," she said softly, kneeling beside the boy. "Are you hurt?" Vincent Sherman's face went pale. Grace Kelly wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't even in this scene. "Grace," Sherman said, trying to regain control. "This doesn't concern you. We're handling a discipline issue." Grace stood slowly. When she turned to face Sherman, something in her expression made the entire crew take a step back. "Discipline?" Her voice was ice cold. "You call hitting a child discipline?" Sherman's jaw tightened. He was used to actors who feared him, who bent to his will. Grace Kelly was different. "Miss Kelly, I suggest you return to your dressing room. This is between me and the boy." "No." Grace moved protectively in front of Tommy. "This is between you and me now." The silence on the set was deafening. Nobody talked to Vincent Sherman like that. He was one of MGM's most powerful directors, with connections that reached all the way to Louis B. Mayer himself. But Grace Kelly didn't care about his power. She cared about the crying child behind her. "You will apologize to Tommy," Grace said, "right now." Sherman laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't take orders from actresses, especially not from some Philadelphia society girl who thinks she can waltz into Hollywood and tell veterans how to work." That's when Grace Kelly made a decision that would change everything. She walked directly to the telephone on the wall. Her fingers dialed a number she knew by heart. "What are you doing?" Sherman demanded. Grace held up one finger, silencing him. The entire cast and crew watched in fascination as Hollywood's ice princess made a phone call that would melt Sherman's world. "Hello, Hedda?" Grace's voice carried across the silent soundstage. "It's Grace Kelly. I have a story for you." Sherman's face went white. Hedda Hopper was the most powerful gossip columnist in Hollywood. One negative story from her could end a career overnight. "Grace, hang up that phone," Sherman said, his voice shaking. "Let's discuss this privately." But Grace was already talking. "I'm watching a grown man abuse a child on the set of Green Fire. The director just struck an 8-year-old boy in front of the entire crew. You could have heard a pin drop on Stage 7. Sherman lunged for the phone, but Grace's assistant director, a burly man named Frank Capella, stepped in his way. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Frank said quietly. Grace continued her conversation with Hedda Hopper, giving every detail. Sherman's name, the specific incident, the child's age, even the crew members who had witnessed it. When she hung up, Sherman was sweating. "You just destroyed me," he whispered. Grace looked at him without a trace of pity. "No, Vincent, you destroyed yourself the moment you raised your hand to that child." But Grace wasn't finished. Not even close. She walked to Tommy, who was still crying quietly in the corner. "Tommy, sweetheart, I want you to call your mother. Can you do that for me?" The boy nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. Grace dialed the number Tommy gave her. When his mother answered, Grace's voice was gentle but firm. "Mrs. Martinez? This is Grace Kelly from the studio. I need you to come pick up Tommy right away. There's been an incident." She explained what had happened, carefully and thoroughly. By the time she finished, Mrs. Martinez was crying too. "I'm coming right now," the woman said. "Thank you, Miss Kelly. Thank you for protecting my baby." As they waited for Tommy's mother to arrive, Grace did something else that nobody expected. She sat down next to Tommy and began to tell him stories. Not Hollywood stories, but stories about her own childhood in Philadelphia. Stories about feeling small and scared, about adults who sometimes forgot that children had feelings too. The crew watched in amazement as Grace Kelly, one of the most famous women in the world, comforted a frightened child with the same tenderness she might show her own son. Vincent Sherman stood in the corner, forgotten and powerless, watching his career crumble in real time. When Tommy's mother arrived, she was a small, fierce woman with worry lines around her eyes. Grace met her at the soundstage door. "Mrs. Martinez, your son is a wonderful actor. What happened today was not his fault. It was never his fault." The woman gripped Grace's hands. "Thank you. Nobody's ever stood up for Tommy before." "Someone should have," Grace said simply. "Children deserve protection, not punishment." After Tommy and his mother left, Grace turned back to the crew. Vincent Sherman was nowhere to be seen. He had slipped away sometime during Grace's conversation with the Martinez family. But Grace wasn't done with him yet. The next morning, Hedda Hopper's column ran with a headline that sent shockwaves through Hollywood. "Grace Kelly exposes child abuse on MGM set." The story was devastating. Hopper didn't just report the incident. She provided context about Sherman's history of on-set cruelty, stories that actors had been too afraid to tell publicly. By noon, Sherman was fired from the picture. By evening, MGM had terminated his contract. By the end of the week, no studio in Hollywood would hire him. But the real story was just beginning. Grace Kelly received a phone call at home that Saturday morning. It was Louis B. Mayer himself, the head of MGM Studios. "Grace," Mayer's voice was tight with controlled anger, "you've caused quite a stir." "Have I?" Grace's voice was perfectly calm. "Vincent Sherman is finished in this town because of what you did." "Vincent Sherman is finished because of what he did, Mr. Mayer. I simply made sure people knew about it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Grace, you need to understand something. Directors like Sherman are valuable to this studio. They make us money. Actors, even talented ones like you, are replaceable." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. Was Mayer threatening her? "Are you saying I should have ignored what I saw?" "I'm saying you should have handled it quietly, through proper channels. There are ways to deal with these situations without involving the press." Grace's voice hardened. "Mr. Mayer, if your proper channels had been working, Vincent Sherman never would have felt comfortable striking a child in front of 40 people. The fact that he did tells me everything I need to know about your proper channels." The silence on the phone was deafening. "Grace," Mayer said finally, "I hope you understand the position you've put yourself in." "I understand perfectly," Grace replied. "I've put myself in the position of someone who protects children. I'm quite comfortable there." She hung up the phone before Mayer could respond. That afternoon, Grace received an unexpected visitor. Alfred Hitchcock arrived at her Beverly Hills home with a bottle of champagne and a knowing smile. "Hitch," Grace said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Celebrating," he said, raising the bottle. "You just did something magnificent, my dear." They sat in Grace's living room as Hitchcock poured the champagne. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've been watching Hollywood for 30 years. I've seen actors who would do anything for fame, directors who would sacrifice anyone for success. But I've never seen anyone throw away their career to protect a child they barely knew." Grace sipped her champagne. "I didn't throw away my career." "Didn't you?" Hitchcock raised an eyebrow. "Mayer's furious. Half the studio heads in town think you're a troublemaker. Some would call that career suicide." Grace smiled. "Hitch, if standing up for an 8-year-old boy is career suicide, then maybe Hollywood needs to die." Hitchcock laughed, delighted. "That, my dear, is exactly why you're going to be just fine." He was right. Within a month, 3 different studios were competing to sign Grace Kelly to exclusive contracts. The publicity from her stand against Sherman had made her more famous, not less. But more importantly, it had established something crucial. Grace Kelly couldn't be intimidated. Tommy Martinez returned to acting 6 months later, but under very different circumstances. Grace Kelly had personally recommended him to 3 different family-friendly productions, all with directors known for their kindness to child actors. She also did something else. She established what became known informally as the Grace Kelly Rule, a requirement that child actors have an advocate on set at all times, someone whose only job was to ensure their safety and well-being. The rule wasn't official, but Grace's influence was such that most directors adopted it voluntarily. Nobody wanted to be the next Vincent Sherman. Years later, when Grace was living in Monaco as Princess Grace, she received a letter from Tommy Martinez. He was 24 years old, married with a child of his own. "Your Serene Highness," the letter began. "You probably don't remember me, but you saved my life when I was 8 years old. I'm writing to let you know that I never forgot your kindness, and I never will. The letter went on to describe Tommy's successful career, not in acting, but as a social worker specializing in child protection. "You taught me that adults are supposed to protect children, not hurt them," he wrote. "I've spent my career trying to be the kind of adult you were to me that day on stage 7. Grace kept that letter on her desk in the palace for the rest of her life. Vincent Sherman, meanwhile, never worked in Hollywood again. He moved to New York and tried to restart his career in television, but Grace Kelly's reputation followed him. Whenever his name came up in meetings, someone would mention that incident with the child actor. He died in 1975, largely forgotten by the industry that had once celebrated his work. At his funeral, only a handful of people attended. Grace Kelly was not among them, but Tommy Martinez was. He came to pay his respects to the man whose cruelty had, in a strange way, led him to his life's calling. "I forgave him years ago," Tommy told a reporter afterward. "Grace Kelly taught me that holding on to anger only hurts yourself, but forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. What he did was wrong, and Grace Kelly made sure the world knew it." The story of Grace Kelly and Tommy Martinez became legend in Hollywood, but it was often misremembered. Some versions made Sherman a monster and Grace a saint. Others downplayed the incident as a minor disagreement blown out of proportion. But the people who were there, who witnessed Grace Kelly's transformation from elegant actress to fierce protector, never forgot what they saw. Frank Capella, the assistant director who had stepped between Sherman and the telephone, worked in Hollywood for another 30 years. He told the story countless times, always ending the same way. "I've worked with a lot of movie stars," he would say, "but I only worked with one real hero. Her name was Grace Kelly." The most important lesson from that day on stage 7 wasn't about Hollywood power or celebrity feuds. It was about courage. The courage to do the right thing even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something. Grace Kelly understood something that many people in positions of power never learn. True strength isn't about dominating others. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. She lived that philosophy for the rest of her life, first as an actress and later as a princess. Whether she was advocating for children's charities in Monaco or quietly helping struggling young actors in Hollywood, Grace Kelly never forgot the lesson of stage 7. Sometimes the most important role you can play isn't in front of the camera. Sometimes it's just being human when humanity matters most. That 8-year-old boy crying on a soundstage could have been forgotten, just another casualty of Hollywood's cruelty. Instead, because one woman had the courage to make a phone call, his story became part of something larger. A reminder that in a world full of people looking the other way, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up and say, "Not on my watch." Grace Kelly said those words that day, and an entire industry took notice. The woman who would become a princess proved that she already had something more valuable than any crown, a conscience that couldn't be bought, silenced, or intimidated. And that, perhaps, is why we still tell her story today.